out yet, if you haven't become disillusioned with the hope and belonging salesman, if you still believe in existing movements and institutions, then this just might not be for you. However, the hope is that any earnest learner will find something of value here. What you're about to hear is a transmission that is not supposed to be heard, a message that is not supposed to be possible. Nobody is supposed to know this kind of information. What you are to do with it, I don't know. I don't even know what to do with it. It's not just the book that I'll be reading from today. It's not just the next book that I'll be reading from in this playlist. It is the way that they are brought together under this common theme. It is a theme of coming to terms with the failures of the 20th century. But also, through this kind of reconciliation, my hope is that some sort of new possibilities will present themselves. Something that is not just this race, class, and sex or gender activism, division, or the simulation of the continuance of movements that long ago fizzled out and were appropriated into being little more than the shock troops of HR's litigation culture agenda that seeks to establish increasing control over the lives, minds, and possibilities of humans who've been reduced to nothing more than labor power, consumers, and niche identarian belonging. This is our situation. Is there a way out? I don't know. All right, everybody, what's up? And welcome to the stream. Let me know if you can hear me okay. This is also a recording for people who will be listening as early as today on the podcast, as well as folks who will be watching it, catching up throughout the day and catching it later throughout the week. And then there's those who will be binging it in the future. And so I always like to temporalize what we're doing by making sure people understand this is not just for the people who are present, but to the people who are present, I do want to apologize from the bottom of my heart for starting so late today. I don't know if anybody was actually sitting there staring at their screen for the last 2 hours wondering, where is Dave? Is this reading ever going to happen? And if you were sitting there wondering that this whole time, then you just must be so happy that I'm here finally. But you also might be angry. There's two reasons you might be angry. One is because you had to wait so long, and the other is two, if you're expecting a continuation of the reading I was doing from Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine, then I have got news for you, bud. It is not happening today. No. I am reading from Anti-Bolshevik Communism by Paul Maddock, and this is where the rubber hits the road, baby. So where are we? We are in part 3 of this series. Parts 1 and 2, I read from chapters 1 and 2 of Surveillance Valley, which is basically about how the thing that mediates our entire existence and is the only referent that we actually have for communication with other people, unless we're just talking about people who live in our neighborhood, the internet, was built by ARPA, which became DARPA, which became the CIA, and it was hardwired to do essentially COINTELPRO or counterinsurgents or psychological warfare from the get-go. When people think that they are so distracted today, and it's because of the smartphone, yeah, in part, there's a lot of amazing stuff we can get from critical media theory analysis, but we have to understand the material conditions of the situation. But what is it that they were responding to, the CIA? What were they responding to? They were responding to, in part, Nazis, sure. But then they brought a bunch of them over in Operation Paperclip and gave them jobs, right? Well, they were also responding to this thing called communism. And anti-Bolshevik communism is a tendency, at least I don't know how much of a tendency it really is. Let me know if there's any real organizations that call themselves this. But it's a term at least coined by Paul Matic, or at least he's the one who uses it seriously in the sense that, this book is by him, and it's called Anti-Bolshevik Communism. Okay, so people who don't believe in liberalism, who don't see a hope in modernity, or whose hopes in modernity only come from seeing beyond the current crises, who reduce the current crises to the fault of the left or the right, or to the liberals or what have you, often are attracted to Bolshevism in its left or right forms. Its left form being Lenin, and its right form being Mussolini, or, just fascism in general. Okay. What does it mean to be an anti-Bolshevik? Well, look, I am not committed to anti-Bolshevism in a strict sense, because I'm not a fierce Democrat. There are ideals from all of these worldviews that I think make a lot of sense, and if I'm feeling seducible that day, then I might get swept off my feet by something every once in a while, but I don't see any real way forward without being critical of both democracy and Bolshevism. And what does it mean to be critical of Bolshevism? Well, it means pissing off some friends, or not really friends, but people who operate in this space. People who love Lenin. We'll just put it that way. Lenin lovers. Bunch of Lenin lovers. Whether they be Trotskyists or Stalinists. This would go from anywhere between Doug Lane and Chris Catrone to Swilletariat and Daniel Tutt, just as people who I've done stuff with who are really into Marx and Lenin. When they think of Marx, they're thinking Lenin. When they perform the political, a lot of times their ideal ego is this sort of Lenin character. And, the division between Stalinism and Trotskyism, without getting too deep into it, comes down in part to an argument over what is real Marxism and who's the proper inheritor of the Leninist project, because both sides will think that they are the true Orthodox Leninist. Well, Paul Matic, he goes hard. He's super in that world. He's from that time. And he's writing at a time when people are saying that Stalin's Russia is a socialist country. And he's like, nah, man, never was. Arguably, it never really had a hope of being so either. And for Matic to come out and write this, the chapters, which might have been essays at first, I'm not sure, in this book, it's real shots fired. It's a real game changer. This is a fucking diss track. This will make Drake versus Kendrick Lamar look like a joke. This goes way deeper. The reason I'm interested in this critique, this line of critique against Bolshevism and Lenin, is because I'm not interested in it coming from the right. The right doesn't have very good arguments against this stuff, in my opinion. Not most of the time. Okay, the best, unless we're thinking like Heidegger. Heidegger has amazing critiques of this stuff. But no, we're thinking about critique from people who basically hold most of the same values at minimum. And that's what I like about Paul Matic. I don't like council communism as a signifier and I'm not so sure that it is the solution. Nance did a while ago say that he thinks I'm some kind of a socialist syndicalist or something like that. And I was like, I don't think that's right. But the fact that I like Paul Matic would be one reason to believe such a thing about me. Okay, I'm going to skip chapters 1 and 2, and as well as the introduction. You're welcome to read those on your own time. You can find this on Anna's Archive if it's legal in your country. If it's not legal in your country, then just I don't know what you should do. But the first chapter is about Karl Kautsky. You don't need to know anything about it before we dive in, except that he is sympathetic, but also extremely critical of Kautsky. Lenin was a big Kautsky fanboy, and then eventually he was like, "Oh my God, you're actually a sellout. How dare you?" All right, well, you can go read that chapter on your own. Chapter 2 is about Luxemburg versus Lenin. Leninists love to act like Luxemburg was basically, in bed with Lenin, that they were part of the same thing. Like they reduce the irreducible differences between these two figures. This is a really good chapter. I would love to come back to it. And I'd love to be corrected if it's not a really good chapter. Same goes for all of these chapters from all of these books that I'm pulling or drawing from in this series. If you've got something great to tell me, let me know. Like if you've got some deep insight that shows me how my sources are wrong, that's great. But as much as I love my Marxist friends, when someone like Chris Catrone says that Leswin Kolakowski's just writing screeds in his 3 volumes on main currents of Marxism, and he called him a crank. I just don't, or I don't know what he called him, but something like that. I'm just like, look, calling people names and telling me, oh, well, that person's project is reducible to their religious affiliation or the way that they changed in this one way doesn't really help me as someone who wants to think for myself. Like I want to think for myself, right? I hope that the kinds of people who care about this kind of content also are trying to think for themselves, which means that if someone like Kolakowski writes 3 volumes called Main Currents of Marxism, and he is critiquing the whole history and all of the different variations of Marxism, and he himself was a Marxist, well, then that's very interesting. We should probably take it seriously. And if someone wants to write an astounding, contribution and critique of that text, then that would be amazing. It's not enough to just dismiss it, though. And I don't think that just dismissing it is a way to sublate. I think the only way to sublate and actually tarry with the negative and the contradictions of the 20th century is to do exactly what we're doing here. So, to the 9 people who've joined so far, to Ian, who was waiting for the last 2 hours, to everybody, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad that you're all going to be a part of this. This is the task that must be undertaken. And maybe we'll come back to the Luxemburg versus Lenin chapter later. Last thing I'll say before I dive into the chapter we'll be reading from today is just that I had a great shout out on social media. Altergorithm shouted me out and said that they got a lot of inspiration from the last 2 parts of this series. They said, I'll actually just read it here. They said, I've just spent 4 days without internet at 2000 Trees Festival, walking between stages of Theory Underground. The revolution will not be. I had it downloaded already and had the book on my Kobo. I'd end up reading ahead and then listening to the podcast as they'd go into some footnote I had missed. It's mad fate how useful some of this is to my dissertation. More use than being at a festival for 4 days. Okay, well, I hope that you weren't with friends who were like, you're so antisocial, unless those friends suck. And if those friends suck and your antisociality was working out for you, then I'm glad you were able to do that. So yeah, the Luxemburg versus Lenin chapter is amazing, but we're just going to get to the Lenin legend. I hope that this will get time-stamped in the future so people can skip everything else and just jump right into it, though the preamble might be useful for some people who are wondering why I'm reading this and blah, 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 because like I said, critique of the left is best when it's done within the left. That's just the way that it is. That's why Kolakowski and Burnham and and Matic are like the best critics of the kind of communism that guys like Haas and Bad Empanada and Hakeem or whatever, as well as, obviously Tut and One Diamond, all of them. If you want a really good critique of all those guys, you can't go to the right. It's got to come from people who were true believers and have, for whatever reason, thought their way out of that position. And ultimately, I think we do have to think ourselves out of that position if we are to ever see the situation anew or communicate with people for whom these kinds of signifiers are not just empty or abstract or removed, but actually counterproductive in a million different ways. Let's go. Chapter 3, The Lenin Legend. The yellower and more leathery the skin of the mummified Lenin grows, and the higher the statistically determined number of visitors to the Lenin mausoleum climbs, the less are people concerned about the real Lenin and his historical significance. More and more monuments are erected to his memory. More and more motion pictures turned out in which he is the central figure. More and more books written about him, and the Russian confectioners mold sweetmeats in forms which bear his features. And yet the fadedness of the faces on the chocolate Lenins is matched by the unclarity and the improbability of the stories which are told about him. Though the Lenin Institute in Moscow may publish his collected works, they no longer have any meaning beside the fantastic legends which have formed around his name. As soon as people began to concern themselves with Lenin's collar buttons, they also ceased to bother about his ideas. Everyone then fashions his own Lenin, and if not after his own image, at any rate after his own desires. What the Napoleonic legend is to France and the legend of Friedrichus Rex to Germany, the Lenin legend is to the new Russia. Just as people once absolutely refused to believe in the death of Napoleon, and just as they hoped for the resurrection of Friedrichus Rex, so in Russia still today, there are peasants to whom the new little Father Tsar has not died, but continues to indulge his insatiable appetite in demanding from them ever fresh tribute. Really quick, I'm gonna create a little poll here to remind people to like. So, did you hit the like button yet? And the answers will be yes. And oh, 1 sec, let me get it. And then the other answer will be no, I want you to fail because I dumb. There we go. Okay. This poll usually helps the algorithm when I do this. It gets people interacting a little bit and sticking around a little bit longer. For whatever reason, it works. Weird. Others light eternal lamps under the picture of Lenin. To them he is a saint, a redeemer to whom one prays for aid. Millions of eyes stare at millions of these pictures and see in Lenin the Russian Moses, St. George, Ulysses, Hercules, God, or devil. The Lenin cult has become a new religion before which even the atheistic communists gladly bent the knee. It makes life easier in every respect. Lenin appears to them as the father of the Soviet Republic, the man who made victory possible for the revolution, the great leader without whom they themselves would not exist. But not only in Russia, and not only in popular legend, but also to a large part of the Marxist intelligentsia throughout the world, the Russian Revolution has become a world event, so closely bound up with the genius of Lenin that one gets the impression that without him, that revolution and hence also world history might possibly have taken an essentially different course. A truly objective analysis of the Russian Revolution, however, will at once reveal the untenability of such an idea. Catherine Maya Podolka says, I was just thinking, you know who else is like this? Christ. profound or not, depending on that figure's function in your narrative. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, my friends who are into Marx have little idols of him all over their house. They have big old posters up on their walls. They're usually like more deep in the idolatry, the actual idol worship, than a lot of Christians I know. But it's organizing on the left in my past, and especially in a Marxist org, that made me realize, like, oh, the whole like LARPing thing, that critique doesn't go far enough. Like, they're dressing up in the outfits of soldiers from like the early 20th century and going and shooting guns together and then drinking and talking about how amazing Trotsky was, or how amazing Stalin was, because of the very difficult decisions that he had to make. It's history buff shit, man. It's like, history's cool. History's great. But I don't care which side you think you would have been on back then, right? I don't care whose side you think you would have been on back then. I know I would have been a worker, and that's my fate. I would have just been a worker, and I probably wouldn't have thought it was that much better, unless I lived in the right district of the right town at the right time. Okay? But like, seeing the religioid sort of glorification, and these constant appeals to materialism. Oh, these people are insufficiently materialist. Oh, these people aren't Marxist enough. It's just like, you guys have never like done anything material in your fucking lives, have you? Okay, I'm not being generous. I'm blowing off some steam here. It's not fair. It's not fair at all. People are dedicating their lives to this stuff because there's a reason to keep the memory alive, but I think it goes too far, and we'll leave it at that. Ian said, an old vase in which you can fit what you need. Old or new guns? They were pretty old guns, man. You know what I mean? It's like the difference. They weren't like muskets. Yeah, but they were pretty old. Some of them were actually used in 1917, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, a truly objective analysis of the Russian Revolution, however, will at once reveal the untenability of such an idea. The assertion that history is made by great men is, from a theoretical standpoint, now wholly unfounded. Such are the words in which Lenin himself turns on the legend which insists on making him alone responsible for the success or the crime of the Russian Revolution. He considered the World War determining as regards the direct cause of its outbreak and for the time of its occurrence. So it's the World War's fault, not Lenin. Yes, without the war, he says, the revolution would possibly have been postponed for decades longer. The idea that the outbreak and the course of the Russian Revolution depended in large measure on Lenin necessarily implies a complete identification of the revolution with the taking over of power by the Bolsheviks. Trotsky has made a remark to the effect that the entire credit for the success of the October uprising belongs to Lenin. Against the opposition of almost all his party friends, the resolution for insurrection was carried by him alone. But the seizure of power by the Bolsheviks did not give to the revolution the spirit of Lenin. On the contrary, Lenin had so completely adapted himself to the necessities of the revolution that practically he fulfilled the task of that class which he ostensibly combated. Of course, it is often asserted that with the taking over of state power by the Bolsheviks, the originally bourgeois democratic revolution was forthwith converted into the socialist proletarian one. But is it really possible for anyone seriously to believe that a single political act is capable of taking the place of a whole historical development? That 7 months, from February to October, sufficed to form the economic presuppositions of a socialist revolution in a country which was just engaged in getting rid of its feudal and absolutistic fetters in order to give freer play to the forces of modern capitalism? Up until the revolution, and in very large measure even yet today, the decisive role in the economic and social development of Russia was played by the agrarian question. Of the 174 million inhabitants prior to the war, only 24 million lived in cities. In each thousand of the gainfully employed, 719 were engaged in agriculture. Damn. In spite of their enormous economic importance, the majority of the peasants still led a wretched existence. The cause of their deplorable situation was the insufficiency of soil. State nobility and large landed proprietors assured to themselves with Asiatic brutality and unconscionable exploitation of the population. Since the abolition of serfdom in 1861, the scarcity of land for the peasant masses had constantly been the question around which all others involved in Russian domestic politics. Wait, what? Had constantly been the question around which all others revolved in Russian domestic politics. Okay, so all of the main domestic politics in Russia, all the main questions in domestic politics related to the peasant question. It formed the main object of all reform endeavors, which saw in it the driving power of the approaching revolution, which had to be turned aside. The financial policy of the Tsarist regime, with its ever-new levies of indirect taxes, worsened the situation of the peasants still more. The expenditures for the army, the fleet, the state apparatus attained gigantic proportions. The greater part of the state budget went for unproductive purposes, which totally ruined the economic foundation of agriculture. Yeah, so, he's laying out the basic material conditions for the failure of this Tsarist state. Freedom in land was thus the necessary revolutionary demand of the peasants. Under this watchword occurred a series of peasant uprisings which soon, in the period from 1902 to 1906, assumed significant scope. In combination with the mass strike movements of the workers taking place at the same time, they produced such a violent commotion in the heart of Tsarism that the period may, in truth, be denoted as a dress rehearsal for the revolution of 1917. The way in which Tsarism reacted to these rebellions is, and I think that that's actually, not only was it a dress rehearsal for the revolution in 1917, but it's also, I think, where Lenin's brother was trying to assassinate the Tsar and got himself killed. The way in which Tsarism reacted to these rebellions is best illustrated by the expression of the then vice-governor of Tambyevsk, Bogdanovich. Few arrested, the more shot. And one of the officers who had taken part in the suppression of the insurrections wrote, "All around us, bloodshed, everything going up in flames. We shoot, strike down, stab." It was in this sea of blood and flames that the revolution of 1917 was born. Notwithstanding the defeats, the pressure of the peasants grew more and more menacing. It led to the Stolypin reforms, which, however, were only empty gestures, stopped short with promises, and in reality brought the agrarian question to not a single step forward. But once the little finger has had to be extended, there will soon be snatching for the whole hand. The further worsening of the peasant situation during the war, the defeat of the Tsarist armies on the fronts, the growing revolt in the cities, the chaotic Tsarist policy in which all reason was thrown overboard, the general dilemma resulting to all classes of society, led to the February Revolution, which first of all finally brought about the violent solution of the agrarian question, which had been a burning one during the past half century. And by the way, that's the same as the October Revolution, because there was two different calendars that we're talking about. One calendar had it in February, the other calendar had it in October. Okay. Its political character, however, was not impressed upon this revolution by the peasant movement. This movement merely gave it its great power. In the first announcements of the Central Executive Committee of the Petersburg Workers' and Soldiers' Councils, the agrarian question was not even mentioned. But the peasants soon forced themselves upon the attention of the new government. Tired of waiting for it to take action in the agrarian question, in April and May of 1917, the disappointed peasant masses began to appropriate the land for themselves. The soldiers on the fronts, fearful of failing to get their proper share in the new distribution, abandoned the trenches and hurried back to their villages. They took their weapons with them, however, and thus offered the new government no possibility of restraining them. All its appeals to the sentiment of nationality and the sacredness of Russian interests were of no avail against the urge of the masses to provide at last for their own economic needs, and those needs were embraced in peace and land. It was related at the time that peasants who were implored to remain on the front, as otherwise the Germans would occupy Moscow, were quite puzzled and answered the government emissaries. And what's that to us? Why, we're from the Tambov government. So basically, all the soldiers were like, our families that are all peasant families are taking back land from like the landowners. So we're going to go get in on that because obviously they would want to protect their families, but they would also want to have something to do with getting some land sovereignty. And all of this was not harnessed yet. So the revolution takes place in 1917. Word doesn't even get around very fast back then. But when word finally gets around, instead of mobilizing to the Soviet cause, they all went back to their farms, which made the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks of the moment realize, oh shit, we're going to have to do something to get those guys on board. Turns out you need them, especially when they make up such a huge proportion of the population. Lenin and the Bolsheviks did not invent the winning slogan, land to the peasants. Rather, they accepted the real peasant revolution going on independently of them. Taking advantage of the vacillating attitude of the Kerensky regime, which still hoped to be able to settle the agrarian question by way of peaceful discussion, the Bolsheviks won the goodwill of the peasants and were thus enabled to drive the Kerensky government out and take over the power themselves. But this was possible for them only as agents of the peasants' will, by sanctioning their appropriation of land, and it was only through their support that the Bolsheviks were able to maintain themselves in power. The slogan, land to the peasants, had nothing to do with communist principles. The cutting up of the large estates into a great number of small independent farming enterprises was a measure directly opposed to socialism, and which could be justified only on the ground of tactical necessity. The subsequent changes in the peasant policy of Lenin and the Bolsheviks were powerless to effect any change in the necessary consequences of this original opportunistic policy. In spite of all the collectivizing, which up to now is largely limited to the technical side of the productive process, Russian agriculture is still today basically determined by private economic interests and motives. And this involves the impossibility in the industrial field as well of arriving at more than a state capitalist economy. Even though the state capitalism aims at transforming the farming population completely into exploitable agricultural wage workers, this goal is not at all likely to be attained in view of the new revolutionary encounters bound up with such a venture. The present collectivizing cannot be regarded as the fulfillment of socialism. This becomes clear when one considers that observers of the Russian scene, such as Maurice Hindus, hold it possible that even if the Soviets were to collapse, Russian agriculture would remain collectivized with control more perhaps in the hands of the peasants than of the government. However, even if the Bolshevik agricultural policy were to lead to the desired end, even a state capitalism extending to all branches of national economy, the situation of the workers would still remain unchanged. Nor could such a consummation be regarded as a transition to real socialism, since those elements of the population now privileged by the state capitalism would defend their privileges against all changes in exactly the same way as did the private owners previously at the time of the 1917 revolution. Wow. So I hope that what you'll take from this so far, or at least what I'm getting from it at this point, is that Russia was a backwards country. Duh. I mean, that's stating the obvious. Everyone knows this. But Lenin didn't think it mattered. Lenin thought that he could go against everything Marx had theorized and that the revolution could be waged from the most backwards country. And people who think, and in some ways they might be correct from time to time, that a lot of great advances were made thanks to this revolution because it got this old, outdated system out of the way and ushered in industrialization. Sure, but then that just means the socialists became the authoritarian shock troops of capitalism that made it somehow even worse than normal capitalism because you were being told where to work. And then if you didn't do as you were told, then you were called a traitor and you were gulagged. You know? This is just obvious to most people. Like, this is just obvious to most people. Most people just associate, the USSR with breadlines, gulags, show trials, disappearing political rivals, etc. But because I like Marx, because Marx is so important to everything that I do here, I end up attracting people who think that I'm going to sit here and fucking jack off to Lenin or sit here and act like the only way forward, comrades, is that we be sufficiently Marxist, as though that's going to do it. Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. It's not going to happen. Not here. Not on my watch. Look, every time I do this, every time I bring it back to this question, I lose a subscriber. And that's like a whole meal, if not like a whole date night, if not a whole percentage of one of the bills that I have to pay if I want to keep living my life. But it's worth it. That is money well spent. I will happily send $30 back, $50 back, $100, whatever. I'll send it back to whoever is so offended that I'm going to go here. I'm going to go here because I'm serious. I don't want to waste my time. And I think everybody else who's jacking off arguing about who's the real Marxist is wasting their time. The industrial workers still formed a very small minority of the population and were accordingly unable to impress upon the Russian Revolution a character in keeping with their own needs. The bourgeois elements, which likewise were combating Tsarism, soon recoiled before the nature of their own tasks. They could not accede to the revolutionary solution of the agrarian question, since a general expropriation of land might all too easily bring in its train the expropriation of industry. Neither the peasants nor the workers followed them, and the fate of the bourgeoisie was decided by the temporary alliance between these latter groups. It was not the bourgeoisie but the workers who brought the bourgeois revolution to its conclusion. The place of the capitalists were taken over by the Bolshevik state apparatus under the Leninist slogan, "If capitalism anyhow, then let's make it." Of course, the workers in the cities had overthrown capitalism, but only in order now to convert the Bolshevik party apparatus into their new masters. In the industrial cities, the workers' struggle went on under socialist demands, seemingly independent of the peasant revolution underway at the same time, and yet in a decisive sense determined by this latter. The original revolutionary demands of the workers were objectively incapable of being carried through. To be sure, the workers were able, with the aid of the peasants, to win the state power for their party, but this new state soon took a position directly opposed to the workers' interests. An opposition which even today has assumed forms which actually make it possible to speak of a red Tsarism, suppression of strikes, deportations, mass executions, and hence also the coming to life of new illegal organizations which are conducting a communist revolt against the present bogus socialism. The talk just now about an extension of democracy in Russia, the thought of introducing a sort of parliamentarianism, the resolution at the last Soviet Congress about dismantling the dictatorship, all this is merely a tactical maneuver designed to compensate for the government's latest acts of violence against the opposition. These promises are not to be taken seriously, but are an outgrowth of the Leninist practice, which was always well calculated to work both ways at the same time in the interest of its own stability and security. The zigzag course of the Leninist policy springs from the necessity of conforming constantly to the shiftings of class forces in Russia in such a manner that the government may always remain master of the situation. And so there is accepted today what was rejected the day before, or vice versa. Unprincipledness has been elevated into a principle, and the Leninist Party is concerned with only one thing, namely, the exercise of state power at any price. The exercise of state power at any price. And guys, here's why I'm not like your standard like anti-tanky kind of liberal or whatever. Like, I probably would have done what Lenin did in any situation where Lenin did what he did. I probably would have done what anybody on any of those councils did if I was in any one of those people's positions. And yeah, exercising state power, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, right? Like, I'm a little bit more like, okay, I'm a little tolerant. I'm a little like, I get it, guys. I get it. But getting it and being a little sympathetic, what's the point of that? Am I supposed to really play that hand up just to make happy some people who have giant posters of Lenin in their bedrooms? I don't care. I don't care about making them happy. At this point, or at this place, however, we are interested only in making clear that the Russian Revolution was not dependent on Lenin or on the Bolsheviks, but that the decisive element in it was the revolt of the peasants. And for that matter, Zinoviev, still in power at the time and on Lenin's side, had stated as late as the 11th Bolshevik Party Congress, which was March through April 1921, quote, "It was not the proletarian vanguard on our side, but the coming over to us of the army because we demanded peace, which was the decisive factor in our victory. The army, however, consisted of peasants. If we had not supported the millions of peasant soldiers, our victory over the bourgeoisie would have been out of the question." The great interest of the peasants in the matter of land, the slight interest with reference to the question of government, enabled the Bolsheviks to conduct a victorious struggle for the government. The peasants were quite willing to leave the Kremlin to the Bolsheviks, provided only that they themselves were not interfered with in their own struggle against the large estate owners. Just remember, everybody, it's okay to go back to the beginning and speed your way to catch up. And if anything feels like it's too much and you're not sure what you're getting from it, just don't worry about it. It's the fire hose method of learning. As long as you get a few mouthfuls of water and they satiate you for today, then great. And of course, this fire hose analogy has to do with ideas and thinking, and the few mouthfuls of water to satiate you means something new to think about, something new to add to how you think about things. And then if a whole bunch of that water hose load of water just goes everywhere else, don't worry about it. Come back to it later if it seems important. But before committing to a text, before buying a book, you should always give it a quick perusal. You should always give it a quick skim. You should always just read a little bit of it so you have some kind of a sense for it, so that you know if you would actually want it or not. And that's what I'm helping you do here. The peasants were quite willing to leave the Kremlin to the Bolsheviks, provided only that they themselves were not interfered with in their own struggle against the large estate owners. But even in the cities, Lenin was not the decisive factor in the conflicts between capital and labor. On the contrary, he was helplessly drawn along in the wake of the workers, who in their demands and actual measures went far beyond the Bolsheviks. It was not Lenin who conducted the revolution, but the revolution conducted him. Though, as late as the October uprising, Lenin restricted his earlier and more thoroughgoing demands to that of control of production, and wished to stop short with the socialization of the banks and transportation facilities. Without the general abolition of private ownership, the workers paid no further attention to his views and expropriated all enterprises. It is interesting to recall that the first decree of the Bolshevik government was directed against the wild, unauthorized expropriations of factories through the workers' councils. But these Soviets were still stronger than the party apparatus, and they compelled Lenin to issue the decree for the nationalization of all industrial enterprises. It was only under the pressure brought to bear by the workers that the Bolsheviks consented to this change in their own plans. Gradually, through the extension of state power, the influence of the Soviets became weakened, until today they no longer serve more than decorative purposes. During the first years of the revolution, up to the introduction of the new economic policy, the NEP, 1921, there was actually, of course, some experimentation in Russia in the communist sense. This is not, however, to be set down to the account of Lenin, but of those forces which made of him a political chameleon, who at one time assumed a reactionary and at another time a revolutionary color. New peasant uprisings against the Bolsheviks first drive Lenin to a more radical policy, a stronger emphasis upon the interests of the workers and the poor peasants who had come off short-handed in connection with the first distribution of land. But then this policy proves a failure, since the poor peasants, whose interests are thus preferred, refuse to support the Bolsheviks, and Lenin turns the face again to the middle peasants. In such a case, Lenin has no scruples about strengthening the private capitalist elements anew. And the earlier allies, who have now grown uncomfortable, are shot down with cannon, as was the case in Kronstadt. And I know Swole will say things like, oh, well, those silly anarchists over at Kronstadt, they were a bunch of anti-Semites anyway. Oh, okay. Sure, man. Whatever, dude. The cognitive dissonance of people who want to support the crushing of the Kronstadt rebellion. It's just like, I mean, to me, it's like talking to somebody who literally believes that the crackers and grape juice at church is the body and blood of Christ. Like, they literally believe it. And it's like, oh, okay. Cool, man. Can't have much more of a conversation here about that anyways. But, I can respect the fact that you need something to believe in. The power and nothing but the power. It is to this that the whole political wisdom of Lenin finally reduces. The fact that the paths along which it is attained, the means which lead to it, determine in their turn the manner in which that power is applied, was a matter with which he had very little concern. Socialism to him was, in the last instance, merely a kind of state capitalism, after the model of the German postal service. In the state capitalism he overtook on his way, for in fact, there was nothing else to be overtaken. It was merely a question of who was to be the beneficiary of the state capitalism, and here Lenin gave precedence to none. And so George Bernard Shaw, returning from Russia, was quite correct when, in a lecture before the Fabian Society in London, he stated that the Russian communism is nothing more than the putting into practice of the Fabian program, which we have been preaching the last 40 years. No one, however, has yet suspected the Fabians of containing a world revolutionary force. And Lenin is, of course, first of all acclaimed as a world revolutionary, notwithstanding the fact that the present Russian government, by which his estate is administered, issues emphatic denial when the press publishes reports of Russian toasts to the world revolution. The legend of the world revolutionary significance of Lenin receives its nourishment from his consistent international position during the World War. It was quite impossible for Lenin at that time to conceive that a Russian revolution would have no further repercussions and be abandoned to itself. There were two reasons for this view. First, because such a thought was in contradiction with the objective situation resulting from the World War. And secondly, he assumed that the onslaught of the imperialist nations against the Bolsheviks would break the back of the Russian Revolution if the proletariat of Western Europe failed to come to the rescue. Yeah, he kind of put everything in on his bets that were placed with the developed countries coming to his rescue. Lenin's call for the world revolution was primarily a call for support and maintenance of Bolshevik power. The proof that it was not much more than this is furnished by his inconsistency in this question. In addition to making his demands for world revolution, he at the same time came for the right of self-determination of all oppressed peoples, for their national liberation. Yet this double-entry bookkeeping sprang likewise from the Jacobinical need of the Bolsheviks to hold on to power. So this whole thing about the right to self-determination, that is this line that Marxists influenced by Lenin always take so seriously. And it's like, of course it makes sense. Like, sure, of course, we want every nation to have self-determinacy. Of course. I mean, that's a basic, I would even say like probably a liberal, like sort of assumption. But it's not a Marxist assumption, right? And it is where it's the aspect of the Marxist communist project that obviously was latched onto the hardest by every national liberation struggle of oppressed people throughout the 20th century. And I'm not saying that's wrong. They needed something to give them inspiration, so they took this. But this is what they take from Marxism, which is, as Maddock is pointing out, double entry bookkeeping. With both slogans, the forces of intervention of the capitalist countries in Russian affairs were weakened, since their attention was thus diverted to their own territories and colonies. That meant a respite for the Bolsheviks. In order to make it as long as possible, Lenin established his International. It is set for itself, or would you say international? He established the third international of the Workers' Party. What's the proper name for it? The Third Workers' International? I don't know. Working Men's Association, some shit like that. It is set for itself a double task. It's set for itself a double task. On the one hand, to subordinate the workers of Western Europe and America to the will of Moscow. On the other, to strengthen the influence of Moscow upon the peoples of Eastern Asia. Work on the international field was modeled after the course of the Russian Revolution. The goal was that of combining the interests of the workers and peasants on a worldwide scale and control of them through the Bolsheviks by means of the Communist International. In this way, at least the Bolshevist state power in Russia received support, and in case the world revolution should really spread, the power over the world was to be won. Though the first design was attended with success, at the same time the second was not accomplished. The world revolution was unable to make headway as an enlarged imitation of the Russian, and the national limitations of the victory in Russia necessarily made of the Bolsheviks a counter-revolutionary force on the international plane. Hence also the demand for the world revolution was converted into the theory of the building of socialism in one country. And this is not a perversion of the Leninist standpoint, as Trotsky, for example, asserts today, but the direct consequence of the pseudo-world revolutionary policy pursued by Lenin himself. Damn. See, like that's fighting words. I get it. Guys. A lot of people are not going to like it. But the people who aren't going to like it are the ones that are just hate watching anyway. They're not the people who are here to think. And the people who are here to think, who don't like it, who disagree with it, are going to take a more mature path in laying out arguments, as opposed to responding the way that people do in church when you question some sacred dogma, which only confirms everything he's saying. It was clear at that time, even to many Bolsheviks, that the restriction of the revolution to Russia would make of the Russian Revolution itself a factor by which the world revolution would be impeded. Thus, for example, Eugene Varga wrote in his book, Economic Problems of the Proletarian Dictatorship, published by the Communist International, 1921. Quote, "The danger exists that Russia may be cut out as the motive power of the international revolution. There are communists in Russia who have grown tired of waiting for the European revolution and wish to make the best of their national isolation. With a Russia which would regard the social revolution of the other countries as a matter with which it had no concern, the capitalist countries would at any rate be able to live in peaceful neighborliness. I am far from believing that such a bottling up of revolutionary Russia would be able to stop the progress of the world revolution, but that progress would be slowed down." End quote. Now, with the sharpening domestic crises in Russia around that time, it was not long before almost all communists, including Varga himself, had the feeling of which Varga here complains. In fact, still earlier, even in 1920, Lenin and Trotsky took pains to stem the revolutionary forces of Europe. Peace throughout the world was required in order to assure the building of state capitalism in Russia under the auspices of the Bolsheviks. It was inadvisable to have this peace disturbed, either by way of war or new revolutions, for in either case a country like Russia was sure to be drawn in. Accordingly, Lenin imposed, through splitting and intrigue, a neo-reformist course upon the labor movement of Western Europe, a course which led to its total dissolution. It was with sharp words, indeed, that Trotsky, with the approval of Lenin, turned on the uprising in central Germany in 1921. Quote, we must flatly say to the German workers that we regard this philosophy of the offensive as the greatest danger, and in its practical application as the greatest political crime." End quote. And in another revolutionary situation in 1923, Trotsky declared to the correspondent of the Manchester Guardian, again with the approval of Lenin, quote, "We are of course interested in the victory of the working class, but it is not at all to our interest to have the revolution break out in a Europe which is bled and exhausted, and to have the proletariat receive from the hands of the bourgeoisie nothing but ruins. We are interested in the maintenance of peace." End quote. And 10 years later, when Hitler seized power, the Communist International did not move a finger to prevent him. Trotsky is not only in error, but reveals a failure of memory resulting, no doubt, from the loss of his uniform, when today he characterizes Stalin's failure to help the German communists as a betrayal of the principles of Leninism. This betrayal was constantly practiced by Lenin and by Trotsky himself, but according to a dictum of Trotsky's, the important thing is, of course, not what is done, but who does it. Stalin is, as a matter of fact, the best disciple of Lenin, insofar as concerns his attitude to German fascism. The Bolsheviks have also, of course, not refrained from entering into alliances with Turkey and lending political and economic support to the government of that country, even at a time when the sharpest measures were being taken there against the communists, measures which frequently eclipsed even the actions of Hitler. All right. Well, what's up, everybody? 16 likes, 13 viewers. We can do better than that. Come on, everybody. We can do better than that. I'm going to take a quick stretch, refill my water bottle, and play a very short, you'll see what it is. I'll be right back. The program will resume shortly, right after this DIY commercial that is not for any sponsor other than ourselves.
Not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff, so big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people. Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god! It's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys. Please. Just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.
Yes. Thank you so much, patrons. Anne's amazing. Thank you for reading that, Anne. All right. The Bolsheviks have, of course, not refrained from entering into alliances with Turkey and lending political and economic support to the government of that country, even at a time when the sharpest measures were being taken against the communists, measures which frequently eclipsed even the actions of a Hitler. Ian's laughing at that shit too. Yeah, that's pretty funny, huh? That when she says, what did she say? She's trying to say Substack, and she said Substate, and then she just loses it. And the sound suppression was on the microphone, so like most of our laughing is cut out. But that's the hardest we've laughed for a while. She was trying to read it in a hurry and then just kept fucking up. It was just a great time. But yeah, you know, the Patreon's amazing. Thank you, patrons, for funding the free content. There's a lot really cool stuff coming right now with the subscriptions and everything like that for the people who do the seminars and whatnot. But just the bread and butter, you patrons at Patreon, you really make all of this stuff on the YouTube and the podcast. You make that shit possible. So basically, it wasn't just failing to come to the help of communists in Turkey. It was also failing to assist the German Revolution. It was also just like over and over and over again, they were taking positions where it's like they were prioritizing their own nation, while at the same time using this, it's about the international workers. It's about everybody. It's the workers of the world. It just has to be led from Russia. But then, of course, all of the other countries are like, we don't really know about that. Seems kind of like you're just worried about your country. And the thing is like, that would be fine, guys. That would be fine. Except that what we're talking about is capitalism. And capitalism cannot be stopped within one country. I'm sorry, that's just a very inconvenient fact. And these were all very predictable problems that lead to a serious deadlock. I'm not saying that there's an easy solution for it. The solution for it is not Joe Biden or Donald Trump against that's like the two directions right now. You got mega communists, and then you got Daniel Tut communists. And they are the same, except that one side says, hey, Biden is the lesser evil. And the other side says, you know what? Trump is the lesser evil. And I'm just over here like, wow, this is very interesting, guys. Wow. Can we change the channel? In view of the fact that the Communist International, insofar as it continues to function, is merely an agency for the Russian tourist trade, in view of the collapse in all countries of the communist movements controlled from Moscow, the legend of Lenin, the world revolutionist, is no doubt sufficiently weakened that one may count on its disappearance in the near future. He thought it would disappear in the near future. Silly guy. Paul Maddock, I'd love to talk to Paul Maddock Jr., his son, who's like also doing some great writing. I would love to talk to Paul Maddock, though, and just be like, dude, did you know that Lenin's like more alive and well than he was in the 80s or 90s? And of course, even today, the hangers-on of the Communist International are no longer operating with the concept of the world revolution, but speak of the workers' fatherland, from which they draw their enthusiasm, so long as they are not forced to live in it as workers. Those who continue to acclaim Lenin as the world revolutionary par excellence are, as a matter of fact, getting excited about nothing more than Lenin's political dreams of worldwide power, dreams which faded to nothingness in the light of day. The contradiction existing between the real historical significance of Lenin and that which is generally ascribed to him is greater and at the same time more inscrutable than in the case of any other personage acting in modern history. We have shown that we cannot be made responsible for the success of the Russian Revolution. We have shown that he cannot be made responsible for the success of the Russian Revolution, and also that his theory and practice cannot, as is so often done, be appraised as of world revolutionary importance. Neither, in spite of all assertions to the contrary, can he be regarded as having extended or supplemented Marxism. In the work of Thomas B. Bromeld, entitled A Philosophical Approach to Communism, recently published by the University of Chicago, communism is still defined as, quote, a synthesis of the doctrines of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. It is not only in this book, but also generally and quite particularly in the party communist press, that Lenin is placed in such a relation to Marx and Engels. Stalin has denoted Leninism as Marxism in the period of imperialism. Such a position, however, derives its only justification from an unfounded overestimation of Lenin. Lenin has not added to Marxism a single element which could be rated as new and independent. Lenin's philosophical outlook is dialectical materialism as developed by Marx, Engels, and Plekhanov. It is to it that he refers in connection with all important problems. It is his criterion in everything and the final court of appeal. In his main philosophical work, Materialism and Empiricism, he merely repeats Engels in tracing the oppositions of the different philosophical points of view back to the one great contradiction, materialism versus idealism. While for the first position, nature is primary and mind secondary, exactly the opposite holds of the other. This previously known formulation is documented by Lenin with additional material from the various fields of knowledge, and so there can be no thought of any essential enrichment of the Marxian dialectic on the part of Lenin. In the field of philosophy, to speak of a Leninist school is impossible. In the field of economic theory, also no such independent significance can be ascribed to Lenin. Lenin's economic writings are more Marxist than those of any of his contemporaries, but they are only brilliant applications of the already existing economic doctrines associated with Marxism. So, hey, by the way, he's giving him some due here. He is saying, it's still genius. It's like brilliant applications of Marxist theory. Lenin had absolutely no thought of being an independent theoretician in matters of economics. To him, Marx had already said everything fundamental in this field. Since to his mind it was quite impossible to go beyond Marx, he concerned himself with nothing further than proving that the Marxist postulates were in accord with the actual development. His principal work on economics, The Development of Capitalism in Russia, is eloquent testimony on this point. Lenin never wanted to be more than Marx's disciple, and so it is only in legend that one can speak of a theory of Leninism. Lenin wanted above all else to be a practical politician. His theoretical works are almost exclusively of a polemic nature. I remember saying that it was all like rhetoric and polemics, and Chris Catrone said something about how like, oh no, he's not polemical. No, he's like measured and hard-nosed serious. And I was just like, dude, he's out here, like, he calls people names. Like, he's actually like a vicious, like verbal sort of a assailant. I mean, he's got a tongue that can cut, but polemics is not theory, nor is it philosophy. They combat the theoretical and other enemies of Marxism, which Lenin identifies with his own political strivings and those of the Bolsheviks generally. To Marxism, practice decides regarding the truth of a theory. As a practician endeavoring to actualize the doctrines of Marx, Lenin, Lenin may have actually rendered Marxism an enormous service. However, as regards Marxism again, every practice is a social one, which can be modified and influenced by individuals only in very limited measure, never decisively. There is no doubt that the union of theory and practice, of final goal and concrete questions of the moment, with which Lenin was constantly concerned, may be acclaimed as a great accomplishment. But the criterion for this accomplishment is again the success which attends it. And that success, as we have already said, was denied to Lenin. His work not only failed to advance the world revolutionary movement, it also failed to form the preconditions for a truly socialist society in Russia. The success, such as it was, did not bring him nearer to his goal, but pushed it farther into the distance. I am curious to know in the comments in the live stream and also in the comment section below on the actual video in the future if you, dear listener, consider yourself a Marxist, and if so, in what way? What has been your relationship to Lenin? And has this given you some pause for thought? Like it did for me, that's for sure. It did for me. But I'm curious to hear about other people and how they read this and people's thoughts overall. I expect that someone is going to come along and try to tell me, oh, well, Paul Maddock, he said this, or practically his politics amounted to this. And I just want you all to know that's a lot less interesting to me. That is some socialite bullshit. I want you to engage with the actual arguments and the actual points being made. Okay? There's been a series of points made here. Chief among those being Lenin was not the prime mover. In his actual ability to maintain power in a lot of cases required him waffling on things, going back and forth in a sort of opportunistic manner. That, the land back to the peasants was never actually part of the agenda. It went directly against the communist program, just as starting the revolution in a pre-industrial society did as well. You just go down the line. The refusing to aid the struggles of others or the revolutions that others were trying to get started in their countries, etc. Like, you just go down the line, thing after thing after thing that we have talked about throughout this recording. I'm very curious to hear about everyone else. Tomas says, Council Communist, Paul Maddock is awesome. Hey, nice. An actual Maddock person in here. Ian says, I don't. And this is kind of the critique I was looking for. Mirza says, it is not significant that Lenin's insistence on communist revolution in a feudal state contradicts Marx's theories and predictions. Oh, is it not significant that Lenin's insistence on communist revolution in a feudal state contradicts Marx's theories and predictions? I think so. I mean, I definitely do, but also, I mean, Marx could be wrong about things. I'm totally open to that. But the way things happen after the revolution are predictable. Like, they're predictable kinds of problems that are going to happen when you announce the world revolution from the most backward country, a country that hasn't even industrialized yet. And then you're trying to get the workers of the industrialized countries just to come bail you out. Like, so it's like Marx could have been wrong, but I don't think he was wrong on this one. And look, I don't blame people for wanting to do something. Like I said, Lenin's brother got killed by, the Tsar. Of course, he was trying to kill the Tsar. So, basically what just happened to Trump, that was like Lenin's brother who was the gunman. That's how you should think about it. Which was actually kind of crazy. We haven't talked about that. But yeah, Trump got shot in the ear And it was crazy. Like I was just doing my thing, and then I was getting messages from people. Oh my god, you should look at this. Oh blah 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 blah. And I was like, oh, he just won, like instantly. Oh, I mean, he was already winning, but it's a done deal now. Uh, whatever, whatever, guys. Disinvest from all that. You just got to focus on what you can focus on, like this kind of shit. Um, Catherine says, child of old school hippies, rising from the dead and trying to understand what the fuck happened to the left. This work helps me understand Russia. It's great to have you, Catherine. Yeah, rising from the dead it's a good time. It's a good time to be doing that. I always say I'm doing this stuff for workers with earbuds, but I should start saying I'm doing it for people who are rising from the dead. I'll read the last paragraph here and then we'll close out. The actual condition in Russia and the present situation of the workers throughout the world ought really to be sufficient proof to any communist observer that the present Leninist policy is just the opposite of that expressed by its phraseology. And in the long run, such a condition must without doubt destroy the artificially constructed Lenin legend, so that history itself will finally set Lenin in his proper historical place. 1935. Damn, that was in 1935? This whole time I was assuming it was like, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years later. Damn. So I'm excited to come back and read Bolshevism and Stalinism. I'm really excited to read that chapter. If you want to go ahead and read ahead, be my guest. It's a much longer chapter. I mean, it's not much longer, but it's about as long. And it'll be its own discrete episode because I have things to go do. I've got a lot of really exciting stuff happening this week. And tomorrow I'm running 10 miles. And I'm not a runner, but I wanted to do something crazy. And Brian is doing a run, and I was like, I'll go with you. And so I'm doing it. And I have to go prepare because it's going to be on some like mountain trails and stuff like that. So, what do I want to say about council communism? I guess, look, this is a great book, but council communism never took off. We have to ask why. Why did it never take off? Is it just waiting for its time? Could it be possible? I don't know. I am not a council communist because I do not like the word communism. And there's nothing from history that I spend very long looking at that leaves me feeling fondly about that signifier. The books that I read about it that, romanticize the word feel utopian and idealistic and super, super removed academically. Like these are university people who don't think about how these signifiers, if they didn't mean something else in the past, what they ultimately mean today is that you hate your parents. You're trying to push them left or you're trying to get back at them for being conservative. It's a teenage phase of political philosophy, and I don't take it seriously. And if you live in a country where you're actively fighting the bosses and the cops keep suppressing you, and every social democratic leader that ever got into office was assassinated, and you're not even allowed to work certain jobs because of the color of your skin or whatever. Look, then I'm not talking about your situation. I can't talk for your situation. I can only talk about my situation. And if my situation is that every time I've ever tried to organize politically, there's two kinds of people. There's fucking Democrats and there's fucking Marxists. Okay? And the anarchists are all basically Democrats, though they kind of like, want to spit in their progressive parents' faces or whatever. And the Marxists are just trying to like be lefter than thou over everybody else and say that they're not materialist enough. And at the end of the day, it is like this romanticizing a time when history seemed to make sense. It's romanticizing a time when Marxist categories still seemed applicable. It's romanticizing a time before the left died. And before it died, due in large part to contradictions that were inherent in its downfall. And those contradictions were not from outside, they were internal. And to say that they were internal is a very important point, because I know that from the Marxist standpoint, contradictions, well, everything's contradictory. Everything's contradictorily constituted. Yep. But sometimes those contradictions lead to the absolute demise of the system, and other times those contradictions make it healthier and immune in some way. So, I mean, that's just where I'm at today. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow I'll be somewhere else. Chris Catrone will be teaching Intro to Marxism at Theory Underground in October. He disagrees with me. I look to learn from him. There's a lot that I will learn from him and everybody else I've mentioned on this stream, I hope, over time. But for now, I've felt the need to do this because we do take Marx seriously here. But taking him seriously does not mean hitching your wagon to a movement or a signifier or a consumer demographic on the internet that is a lost cause. Okay? And I don't know. We have to tarry with that, come to terms with it, if there is to ever be some kind of future possible. And of course, there might not be. And in that case, then we're just going to have fun at the dance party at the end of the world. Thanks for being here, everybody. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing another one of these. I was going to do another one on Wednesday. The times moved around. I might not do it. We'll see. And if I'm late, just you can suppose I'm doing something important like I was today. Ian, if you're still there, what I'm about to roll is the new PSA. And it's what I was editing right before I got here late. So take a look at it, everybody. I put a lot of work into it. Think about what it says. Take care. Appreciate you all.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Graham from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But Most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Zizek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McCarrickers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
Finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff, so big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people. Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god! It's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you, patrons. Oh, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys.
Please.
Just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You did so good. Thanks, guys.